Canon have built up something of a reputation of releasing cameras that have underwhelming spec sheets. Anyone who remembers November 3rd of 2011 will know this. That was the day that Canon announced the original C300 in the morning, and in the afternoon, Red announced the original Red Scarlet. Now, on paper, the Red Scarlet blew the Canon out of the water. The specs were many times over what the Canon had, and the internet went crazy. People were confused about how two cameras priced the same could have completely different specs. People were saying that Canon was finished, they were going to sell all their Canon equipment and they were going to switch over to Red. But funny enough, it was the Canon that went on to dominate the industry. Every single production house and freelancer bought a C300, and you couldn't move for news footage having shallow depth of field once that camera came out. I even remember stories about people getting hired who had no show reels whatsoever, but had a C300, and they were getting hired off the strength of that. That's how popular that look was, and that camera didn't even meet broadcast standards back in them days. To be fair to both companies, these cameras were aimed at different audiences. The C300 was a run and gun documentary camera, a cross between a DSLR and an ENG camera, and the Red was a budget cinema camera targeting the independent film production market. The point that I'm trying to make is that Canon brings out cameras that have underwhelming spec sheets but go on to deliver more than the sum of their parts. All that could be about to change though, because Canon have started to release, or should I say tease, specs for the new upcoming Canon EOS R5. Now, on paper, those specs, they look spectacular. I'm sure you know what they are already, but full frame, 8K RAW internal with continuous autofocus. They also have 8K 10-bit 442 H.265 with C-Log and continuous autofocus. They've got 10-bit 4K up to 120 frames a second. And that's just the headline video specs. On the photography side, you have 12 frames a second with the mechanical shutter, you have 20 frames a second with the electronic shutter, there's dual card slots, and my personal favourite, they've brought back the joystick and taken away that funny touch bar thingy. So what's caused this change over on Canon? Why now are they bringing out these kind of killer specs when for so long they've always been a little bit behind the curve? Well, I can think of two possible scenarios, one good, one not good. And let's start with the not good. The first scenario would be that the Canon marketing department has decided to shake things up a little. They've got tired of all these other camera manufacturers advertising these big headline specs that grab all the attention, but then actually go on to under-deliver on them. You know the type of thing I'm talking about, 4K that overheats the camera and shuts it down, or high frame rates that actually only work in a burst mode. And people get really excited about these, they jump on the bandwagon, I'm selling all my equipment, I'm moving over to X, Y, Z camera. 6 months later they realised that those specs didn't actually live up to the hype. But that's too late, because another spec sheet's come out with great specs again, and everyone's going to go and switch over to that camera. Maybe the Canon marketing department have thought, we're going to have a bit of that, and they're releasing these high figures, these big specs, but there's actually massive caveats with them that we don't know yet, and in the long run we're going to be disappointed. Now, I'm sure hoping that's not the case. Scenario number two is that the Canon research and development department have been working overtime and have developed some amazing technology, and Canon has decided that they want to make the R5 the benchmark of mirrorless cameras. This is going to be a camera that we look back on in the future and think that was the start of the mirrorless revolution. A few other camera companies have maybe dipped their toes in the water, but that's going to be the killer benchmark that we're all going to remember many years to come. This is going to be the camera that finally makes people give up their DSLRs and switch over to mirrorless full time. Personally, I think it's probably going to be a bit of both scenarios, because there's still a lot we don't know about this camera, and some of them are important questions. We don't know the dynamic range, for example. What's the buffer size when we're going to be shooting these 12 frames a second? Is that with RAW or is it just with JPEG? We don't actually know the resolution of the sensor yet. People are guessing at around 45 megapixels because that works out with the 8K. But is it? Do we really know that for sure? Could it be more? What are the data rates on those video files? Are they massive or are they heavily compressed? Is the 8K just a burst mode? Is it full 8K? Is the 120 frames a second cropped in? And what about us who still use 1080p? Is that being completely ignored out of this camera? Does it downsample from the full frame? Or do we have a cropped window? Wouldn't it be cool if there was 240 frames a second in HD? It must be possible, but is it going to be put in there? So far we've had the big headline specs, but as we all know, the devil's in the detail. So will this camera go on to be the start of the revolution that Canon promised back with the original EOS R a couple of years ago? Or will it be a massive disappointment and actually a change in how Canon are going to start marketing their cameras? I've got my fingers crossed hoping it's going to be a great camera. On paper it definitely sounds that way, but until you shoot with it, until you know more of the details, you just don't know these things. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this camera. What are your thoughts? Are you looking forward to it? Is it going to be the best camera ever? Are you going to sell all your Sony equipment and switch back to Canon? Or do you think it's going to be a massive disappointment? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.